You know, when we think about schizophrenia, our minds usually jump to things like hallucinations or delusions, right? But what if I told you that some of the most devastating symptoms are the ones you can't even see, the kind that medication often struggles to help with? Well, today, we're going to dig into some really fascinating research that asks a huge question. Could talk therapy be the key to treating what many thought was untreatable?
All right, let's dive into this. We're going to start with what's often called the unseen struggle. This is the part of schizophrenia that doesn't get a lot of attention, but for the people living with it, it's a massive daily challenge. So the research we're looking at is all about something called negative symptoms. Now that name's a bit confusing. It doesn't mean bad symptoms. Think of it like this. Positive symptoms add something to a person's experience, like hallucinations. But negative symptoms, they subtract. They take things away, almost scooping out a person's ability to connect with life. And these symptoms break down into 5 core areas. First, there's avolition. That's like your internal engine just runs out of gas, a total loss of motivation. Then you've got anhedonia, which is the inability to feel pleasure from things you used to love. Add asociality, a deep lack of interest in being around other people. Then blunted affect, where your face just doesn't show the emotions you're feeling inside. And finally, alegia, where even speaking becomes difficult. I mean, you can see how all of this together builds this huge wall between a person and the world.
And this quote from the researchers really just hits the nail on the head. It's not just about feeling bad. We're talking about things that make it incredibly hard to live on your own, to keep a job, to have friends. It's a fundamental barrier to a normal life. And that is exactly why finding something that works is, well, it's everything.
Okay, so if the usual medications aren't really cutting it for these specific symptoms, what's next? Well, researchers started looking at something totally different, an approach that tackles our thoughts and our actions head-on. And that brings us to CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. You've probably heard of it. It's not just talking. It's more like a training program for your brain. The whole idea is to give people a toolkit, right? Tools to spot those self-defeating thoughts, like, why even try? And then challenge them and build new, healthier habits.
So the big question is, does it actually work for these really tough negative symptoms? To get a real solid answer, you can't just do one more study. You have to go bigger. You have to combine everything.
And that's where this incredible tool comes in, the meta-analysis. Seriously, this is the gold standard in science. Instead of running one new experiment, you become a detective. You go out and collect all the best research that's ever been done on a topic and put it all together to see the big picture.
And when I say they searched, I mean they searched. They cast a huge net across 10 of the biggest scientific databases out there, looking for every single study on this.
They started with literally thousands of papers, but they were picky. They only wanted the best of the best, the most rigorous, well-designed studies. And that brought them down to 15 top-tier trials. Now get this, those 15 studies, when you put them all together, represented over 1,300 people. That's a huge sample size. And that gives the results some serious weight, making them way more trustworthy than any single study alone. So that's the process in a nutshell. You gather all the studies, you grade them for quality, you crunch all the numbers together, and you see what conclusion emerges. It really is like taking a bunch of little streams of data and funneling them into one massive, powerful river of evidence.
All right, so after all that incredibly detailed work, what did they find? What was the big takeaway? Well, the results were pretty stunning.
The comparison was super straightforward. They had 2 groups. One group got their standard care, usually meds and some support, plus CBT. The other group just got the standard care, what they call treatment as usual. So, who did better?
And the answer was a huge yes. The group that got CBT showed a major improvement in their negative symptoms. And we're talking a statistically significant improvement, which in science speak means this was no fluke. This was a real, measurable effect.
But here's the part that really got my attention. Was this just a temporary boost? Nope, not at all. The benefits held up. They checked in at 3 months, 6 months, even a year later, and the improvements were still there. That's huge. This stuff sticks.
And it gets even better. The benefits didn't just stop at those core negative symptoms. It was like a positive ripple effect. People's day-to-day lives got better, Their social skills improved. They were connecting with people again. It wasn't just fixing one problem. It was helping to rebuild a life.
So we have this really strong evidence that CBT works. But why it works? Well, that opens up a whole new can of worms, and it has massive implications for how we think about treatment going forward.
This is the million-dollar question, and the researchers themselves bring it up. Is the therapy getting at the deep biological roots of the illness, or is something else going on here?
Okay, to get this, we have to understand the difference between primary and secondary symptoms. Think of it this way. A primary symptom comes directly from the illness itself, but a secondary one is more of a knock-on effect. For example, maybe you stop going out not just because of avolition, but because you've developed social anxiety about your symptoms. CBT is brilliant at tackling those secondary issues, the anxiety, the defeatist beliefs, which can make a huge difference.
And the researchers are really clear. This is a huge step, but it's not the final destination. They've laid out a roadmap for what's next. We need to create versions of CBT that are even more targeted. We need better tools to figure out what's a primary versus a secondary symptom. And the ultimate goal? Totally personalized therapy, designed for each specific person.
Which leaves us with this incredible, thought-provoking question. For so long, the conversation around schizophrenia has been almost entirely about medication. But this research, it suggests that a psychological approach, one that empowers people to change how they think and act, might be just as vital. It really feels like it could be a game changer, opening the door to a much more complete and honestly, a much more hopeful way of helping people recover.